Hello and welcome to Eye on Politics. Another busy week as we race to the political finish line in November. And we begin with the shifting electoral college map. While Vice President Kamala Harris became her party's nominee and named Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate, the polls in the battleground states have been moving in her direction and away from former President Trump and his running mate, Ohio Senator Vance. This began happening after President Biden announced he would not run for re-election. Let's go to the map. Because of the polls, the Cook Political Report has now moved 3 states back into the toss-up column: Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia. They were lean Republican. The Cook Political Report had shifted these 3 towards former President Trump last month, just before President Biden announced he wouldn't run for re-election. Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania remain toss-up states. These 6 states will be where the election is won. And now that the Democratic ticket is set, Vice President Harris and Governor Walz wasted no time hitting the trail in all these states this past week. They campaigned together for the first time Tuesday in Philadelphia, then began a tour of the other battleground states. The vice president said she'd like to bring down prices that are still too high and advocated for affordable health care, child care, and housing. And she vowed to protect voting rights and reproductive or abortion rights. Harris praised Walz, and he told the crowd about who initially prompted him to run.
He's the kind of person who makes people feel like they belong and then inspires them to dream big. And that's the kind of vice president he will be.
But it was my students. They encouraged me to run for office. They saw in me what I was hoping to instill in them: a commitment of common good.
Congressman Mark Vesey of Fort Worth knows Governor Walz from his time as a member of Congress. Many people were surprised that Walz was the choice because he is not from a key battleground state. Minnesota is considered lean Democratic and blue by the Cook Political Report. We asked Vesey why he believes Walz will help Democrats win key battleground states in the Rust Belt, the neighboring Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania.
This is a good pick because Tim Walz represents the center of the country. And he also has an everyday person background. A lot of people don't realize that, Tim was a football coach. He was a command sergeant major in the Army. He is just someone that has had a good all-around experience that I think that everyday people in middle America can identify with. And that's where we're going to need to pick up those winning electoral votes. We're going to need to win in Michigan. We're going to need to win in Pennsylvania. We're going to need to win in Wisconsin and some other states that are in the middle of the country. And Tim brings that to the ticket.
And how would you describe him politically?
Oh, I would say that Tim is what I would call very pragmatic in his approach to everything, whether it is the environment. Again, I mentioned that he's someone that I share outdoorsman activities with. He's just a great all-around guy. He's someone that different parts of the party, whether you're progressive or whether you're more moderate, I think that people will be able to rally around him and really see him as someone that can galvanize us and add an extra layer of excitement. Of course, Vice President Harris has already added so much excitement, but Tim really, I think, is the icing on the cake.
And what do you think their strongest points of their campaign are? Their mantra, their talking points, etc., to prosecute this campaign?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, again, when you talk about, Kamala Harris, her background as a prosecutor, Tim Walz, football coach, former veteran, I think what they bring to the ticket that I think that the American public is going to identify with is that people want to maintain normalcy. Joe Biden has brought in 4 years of normalcy, and people want to keep that.
Inflation and border security are really the 2 top issues that we've seen in poll after poll, and they give Republicans higher marks than the Democrats on both of those. So how do Democrats answer for the record inflation we saw in 2022 and the border, which saw record numbers of people entering the U.S. illegally?
We're starting to see inflation numbers come down in many areas, and so I think that Democrats have a story to tell there. I also think on the border that we have an incredible story to tell. We actually, we're going to pass the toughest bill that even conservative news networks said was the toughest immigration bill to ever come out of D.C. And Trump told the speaker, who's a Republican also, to kill the bill because it would help President Biden. I think that sort of thing the American public is sick of, because we could have had a very good immigration bill that would have passed and would have drastically reduced numbers. And the Republicans blocked it because they thought that it was going to hurt them politically during an election year. And to me, that's just no good. And I think that the American public is going to reject that.
State Representative Victoria Nieve-Criado of Mesquite, who's also chair of the Mexican-American Legislative Caucus, also praised Governor Walz and what he adds to the ticket.
It's exciting to see somebody like Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, somebody who's a former football coach, somebody who is a rural public servant, and what he brings to the table, I think, is a really strategic and smart pick for Vice President Harris. I trust her judgment on selecting him. And you know, just like what we saw here in Texas, when you had a bipartisan coalition of rural Republicans with Democratic lawmakers voting down school vouchers, for example, I think it's really going to take that type of coalition of rural voters to also help Vice President Harris and our new Harris-Walz ticket get across the finish line this November.
I saw a photo of you with Regina Montoya recently with Vice President Harris at her residence a couple of weeks ago. Tell me, how did that come to be? And what did you say to her when you met her?
Thank you. So the Vice President was honored to be invited to her residence at an event celebrating Latino leaders from across the country. And, you know, I've been a supporter of the Biden-Harris campaign and wanting to do what we can to continue to shine a spotlight on the issues happening in Texas. We're honored that and just so excited that she is our nominee.
Inflation certainly has been a very big issue. How do you think Democrats best answer for that?
Yeah, the Biden-Harris administration passed the Inflation Reduction Act that had a huge impact across the nation, and I think we're going to continue to see that. They're very cognizant of the cost of food, putting food on the table. We know that those are real issues facing Americans, not just here in Texas, and so we know that they're doing everything that they can to get legislation and to pass policies that are going to make an impact on people's pocketbooks right at home.
What about border security? Obviously a very big issue here in Texas. And how do you think that the Harris-Walz ticket will be able to discuss, given the record numbers of people who've entered the country illegally?
Yeah, I look forward to raising those issues also with the campaign, and we know that that is an issue that is important to them. As chair of the Mexican-American Legislative Caucus, we saw, last year really an attack on Latinos. We know that immigration policies have to change, but they have to be done in a way that makes sense. Trump's plan to do mass deportations all across this country just does not make sense.
The Texas Secretary of State has announced independent candidates Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his running mate Nicole Shanahan will appear on the Texas ballot in November. Kennedy's seen in Dallas at an Earth Day event in April, and his campaign had more than 122,000 valid signatures submitted with its petition. That's more than 9,000 signatures needed to get onto the ballot. Coming up, Republicans are pushing back against the Harris-Walz ticket, why North Texas Congressman Jake Ellzey says Walz was a bad pick for Democrats. And later, it's back to school for millions of students in Texas. We spoke with the man who oversees school security for 1,200 school districts about a new system designed to improve safety, all when Eye on Politics returns. Welcome back to Eye on Politics. Pushing back, former President and Republican nominee Donald Trump and his running mate, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, instantly criticized Vice President Kamala Harris's new running mate, Governor Tim Walz, as weak, failed, and dangerously liberal. Senator Vance has been crisscrossing the battleground states, and the former president held a news conference in Florida this past week.
Kamala's record is horrible. She's a radical left person at a level that nobody's seen. She picked a radical left man.
Tim Walz's record is a joke. He's been one of the most far left radicals in the entire United States government at any level. But I think that what Tim Walz's selection says is that Kamala Harris has bent the knee to the far left of her party, which is what she always does.
And North Texas Congressman Jake Ellzey of the 6th Congressional District joins me now to talk about the presidential race. Congressman, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Jack.
You bet. Good to see you. So first, what did you think of the now formed Democratic ticket of Harris and Minnesota's Governor Tim Walz?
Well, the defenders of democracy sure did find an interesting way to pick their new nominee, somebody who's never gotten a vote in a primary, and all of a sudden she's by acclamation the nominee, and she has picked a radical just like her for the most radical ticket ever in American history. I don't think that's going to sell well in Middle America.
How concerned are you, though, that the Democrats are now more energized, obviously, with this ticket than they were before with President Biden? And what impact do you think that will have on the race?
I think they're just grateful that it's not Joe Biden, because they knew that that was a sinking ship. We've watched Joe Biden for the last 50 years. We've seen him on camera. We've seen him live, and there is a decline. And nobody likes to see that in their American president. So they were able to ditch him after the Republican convention, and by acclamation got Kamala Harris. Now, what I think is interesting is they hid her for 3 years, and anytime she had an appearance, it was usually with hired actors, as case in point when she met with children to talk about NASA. Now she hasn't had a single press conference in 19 days since becoming the nominee, and now they're forcing attention on Tim Walz and his record to distract from the fact that I don't believe this presidential nominee on the Democrat side has any real record that is successful or any plan.
But in the last week, we've seen the race, the polls shift towards Kamala Harris and now Tim Walz and away from former President Trump and Ohio Senator J.D. Vance. So if you look at the Cook Political Report, they put back Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia, which they had just moved to the lean Republican column 3 weeks ago before Joe Biden said he's not going to run again. And now it's back to a toss-up. So what do you make of that? I
think there's usually excitement after somebody is chosen on the side that picks them. On the Democrat side, there's going to be excitement because they've got this new ticket. But over the course of the next couple of months before early voting starts, we're going to be able to portray them as they really are, with things that they've done themselves, things that they've said themselves on camera about the economy, about foreign policy, about the war in Israel, about the world in general, as well as their records, particularly in Tim Walz's case, of failure in Minnesota. And over the course of the next couple of months, we're going to see them being portrayed for what they really are, and I think that excitement will erode. When a poll comes out, generally it's done nationally. A presidential race is won state by state, right. So there's a small bump, but I still believe that this is going to be an overwhelming victory for Donald Trump.
So what specifically do you think Republicans, Trump, Vance, need to do to focus this race on and win?
Put Kamala Harris and Tim Walz's record on constant loop for the next 2 months. It speaks for itself, and it speaks in the direction that they want to take this country. It's about it's about electrical vehicles. It is about Green New Deal. It is about DEI. It is about American weakness. It is about sympathy for folks coming up through the border to do us harm. It's for an open border. It's for a weak economy. So the record speaks for itself. Tim Walz has a very long 5-year record of failure in Minnesota and has turned Minnesota into a failing state with a higher crime rate of violent crime than the national average. He's got the highest COVID fraud rate in America of $250 million. And then there's also the character issue of, when he speaks, is he telling the truth? And I know that his military record has come up of late as whether or not he's telling the truth about it.
Congressman Jake Ellzey, thank you so much. Good to see you.
Thank you, Jack.
We appreciate it. And coming up next, we talk to the man who oversees security of all 1,200 school districts when Eye on Politics returns. Now to school safety. Most North Texas students returned to the classroom this week. Several weeks ago, the Texas Education Agency implemented the Sentinel School Safety System, a first of its kind that will track how well schools are doing to keep strangers out of their buildings, identify students who pose risks, and how vulnerable school campuses are. It cost the state $2 million to implement this. It won't cost the school districts anything, but they are required to participate. I spoke with the chief of school safety and security at the TEA, John Scott, about how it works.
Well, you are correct that schools will enter information in there that historically, they've already had to submit to TEA for school safety monitoring. And it is not a public-facing system, but there's also another side. There's a side where, us at TEA, when we conduct an intrusion detection audit, we also enter that information there. So, the superintendents are able to see the results of those audits real time. It also assists with us with emergency management and letting us communicate with school districts. A lot of times when you have an emergency, whether that be, flooding or a hurricane, a train derailment, or a man-made disaster, school districts have TA has a hard time getting information out to school districts, and school districts have a hard time getting information back. And Sentinel is going to facilitate that. It's going to allow us to take information that the state has and provide that to school districts in a very quick fashion. But more so, it's also going to allow school districts to provide the state information to better the state's ability on their decision making.
God forbid, a zillion times over, we have another school shooting. How does this help these schools and, neighboring schools, et cetera, and the state?
Well, first and foremost, the school district would use their silent panic technologies and also, 911 immediate. Sentinel would never replace that. What Sentinel will do is when there is an emergency and we learn about it, we're able to get those resources to the schools very quickly. Because the state knows about it, we're able to elevate those with other agencies. But furthermore, what it's going to do in that aspect is school districts will now conduct behavior threat assessments in Sentinel. This Texas School Safety Center has historically put out a lot of great training regarding behavior threat assessments, but there was no one way to do it in the state. A lot of school districts did it very differently. What Sentinel will do is Sentinel will standardize how schools do behavior threat assessments. And that's a good thing. So that means we're all speaking the same language when we're discussing things, a school's discussing things, from one district to another, or, even within their district, everybody's talking about the same thing. Furthermore, when school district needs some technical assistance, with these behavior threat assessments, with us all speaking one language, TEA and our agents in the field are out there, and they're able to help schools because they know what they're talking about, and we're all talking about the same system.
A new state law passed last year requires the state to conduct detailed vulnerability assessments at about 25% of the 1,200 school districts each year. And I asked Scott about their findings so far.
Last year, we did almost 70. They take a while. It's not a courtesy look. It is a deep dive into the schools. So we do that. But more than that, our agents in the field that we've hired, what they are is they're advisors, and they provide technical assistance. Particularly in rural Texas or in a smaller area, where a school district might not have a director of security. They may not have a security professional on staff. Our guys are out there just a phone call away. The superintendents know our guys out there, that they know their cell phone numbers. And if they have a question of any kind, they're able to call our guys. An example of that might be if a school district wants to build a security vestibule on a campus, and maybe their layouts doesn't make it very simple, or they just don't know what to do. They call our guys, and our guys physically travel to the campus and are there in person and help them. And that could be anything from construction, building a security vestibule, to a question about where to position cameras or fencing question.
Based on that first 70 districts that were part of this vulnerability assessment, what trends did you see that were troubling that need to be addressed?
Well, I think that the schools did very well. I think the schools did well. There are always small issues, that schools don't see. It's no major issues, but small things. It's kind of, I kind of compare it to like somebody checking your spelling. You've seen it, but to have an outside set of eyes come look at it, I think goes a long way.
Texas has recently scored some big corporate relocations. Sarah Jenkins has this week's brief.
businesses uprooting headquarters for the Lone Star State boils down to more than just Chevron and Elon Musk with Tesla, Twitter, and SpaceX. Many Fortune 500 companies relocated headquarters to Texas, including Hewlett-Packard in Houston. Charles Schwab moved to a suburb of DFW, and Apple set up its second-largest campus in Austin, employing hundreds of thousands of residents. Since 2020, over 150 companies moved or planned relocations or expansions in Texas, even during the pandemic. More than half of those companies made the move from California. Texas has one of the top 10 economies in the world, a premier corporate environment with no corporate or personal income tax, and a skilled workforce. The Lone Star State is centrally located, with access to major markets, and may soon be home to its very own stock exchange. In early June, private equity giant BlackRock announced plans to launch a new stock market in Dallas called the TXSE, a challenge to the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ.
And a friendly reminder that we've placed all the full interviews from today's show on our website, cbsnewstexas.com. Go to the Eye on Politics icon. And that's all for Eye on Politics this week. I'm Jack Fink. I am listening, and we are listening at CBS News Texas. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you again next week. And from all of us here, have a great Sunday.